Today's goal is 100 berries. Smash that button to get that juicy fruit and hit subscribe for more amazing recaps. Now let's get into it. It turned out that everything so far was just a figment of the king's imagination. He closed the memorial and sighed, thinking to himself, I wish I could approach it this way, but as a ruler, I must act with propriety. After a pause, he asked aloud, Is this truly the best course of action? The court officials broke into a cold sweat, bowing respectfully. The left minister stepped forward and spoke cautiously. Given Joseon's current state, Your Highness, this is indeed the best approach. The king rubbed his temples, clearly fatigued. Instead, I'll establish a new organization. I'll call it the White Music Council. This council will assume the responsibilities of the current Government Affairs Council, he continued. The organization will consist of 3 prime ministers and a judicial overseer, making up what we'll call the 5 courts. Pointing to each, he designated the new titles: East Scribe, West Official, Central Advisor, South Clerk, and North Overseer. Standing tall, a fierce intensity filled his gaze. With this, we'll maintain control in all directions, he said. Given Joseon's current unfavorable situation, I'll keep the same personnel count but reassign roles. Joseon will thrive under this new structure. The officials stood speechless as his resolute words struck them like arrows, piercing their concerns. The king continued, This military reform is the proposal you brought forth, which I questioned. Are you certain it's the best plan for Joseon's situation? And if matters worsen, would you simply suggest a worse plan and call it the best option? Are you genuinely reading the scriptures? Frustrated, he stormed out, ignoring the officials' bewildered expressions. Leave. I'll handle this myself, he ordered sharply. The left minister, desperate to respond, tried to speak. Your Highness, Before he could finish, 2 officials silenced him, covering his mouth. The king shot them a fierce glare, one that made them tremble as if he'd devour them on the spot. Without another word, he turned and strode off. Later that evening, in his private chambers, the king looked over scattered papers on the floor. Deep in thought, he jotted notes on sticky papers and stuck them to the wall, muttering, This level of planning isn't solid enough. There must be a better way. The next morning, though no one had yet arrived, the AI's voice echoed through the room. Vice Tutor, His Majesty requests that you review and supplement these materials. 2 officials chatted outside the room. Isn't this the same official who came 2 days ago? One asked. Yes, and I was here 4 days ago too, replied the other. This makes 3 times now. His Highness seems to foresee potential problems ahead. That afternoon, the chief steward entered with a pile of documents. Your Highness, the scholars have completed the materials you requested. Bring them here immediately, the king replied, drumming his fingers on the desk. As he examined the documents, he murmured, With the expansion of our finances, we'll strengthen firepower and the navy, secure our control over the seas, and fortify the northern defenses. But he wondered, is this truly the best approach? Suddenly, a voice called from outside, Your son Hyang is here. May he enter? The king paused, then nodded. Yes, let him in. Hyang entered, looking concerned. Father, thank you. You look so tired. The king rubbed his forehead with a weary smile. I haven't slept much these past few days. Thinking about these reforms has been exhausting. I asked the court officials for strategic advice, but what they provided was laughable at best. I decided I'd handle it on my own. Hyang, looking worried, reminded him gently, Father, you must rest. Joseon can only be at peace if you're in good health. The king chuckled. You cheeky boy, I get it. I did rest a bit today. He looked at his son and added, But you didn't come here just to nag me, did you? Hyang smiled. Actually, I came with an idea about the Nuzan people. Oh, the king replied, intrigued. What is it? Hyang explained. This recent unrest was led by Lamanju of the Nuzan. He brought his people to the basin, but if he's merely a puppet, then someone's pulling his strings. During this period, we could attempt to mend our relations with the Nuzan. He continued, the influence of the Johnsons is significant with them, and it appears the relationship between Yenju and Iagan is strained. Why not invite the tribe leader to the palace to ease these tensions? The king fell silent, deep in thought, then smiled. You've given me goosebumps, son. I've already sent someone to monitor the movements of the Nuzan leaders. Hyang's eyes widened. As expected of you, father. The prince then offered, would you like to review this? He handed Hyang a set of documents. Is this your military reform plan? Hyang asked, curiosity piqued. Not exactly, the king replied, and they began discussing the details. This plan was drafted by the founders and has been passed down as part of the Three Pillars doctrine. After a lengthy discussion, the king asked, what do you think? Hyang clapped his hands, admiringly. Father, this is even more brilliant than I imagined. The prince then observed Hyang's expression and, with a hint of mischief, remarked, you look like someone about to lose funding. Perhaps I should cut the research institute's budget. Hyang's face fell, but the king continued, but if your ideas help with military reform, I might reconsider and even increase it. Cheering up, Hyang exclaimed, you promised. The king called to his steward. Fetch the new ceremonial robes for the crown prince and arrange for tea and sweets from the royal kitchen. As Hyang prepared, memories of his teacher's lessons filled his mind. Remember this order, his teacher had said. Tongjin, Bohai, Goryeo, Chen, Scylla's unification. The answer lies within the question. Dressed in his ceremonial robes, Hyang silently thanked his teacher. Yes, teacher, he thought, the lesson still clear in his mind. He recalled how the Joseon dynasty's fifth rank had been established after King Sejo's rise, where citizens aged 16 and up performed military service, and officers were selected through rigorous testing. Although the system had evolved, its roots were deeply entwined with Joseon's military legacy. In moments of uncertainty, King Seonjo had strengthened the nation's defenses, compiling a manual post-invasion and creating specialized units. This history guides us, Hyang thought with renewed determination. Referring to the beacon of wisdom, the light of Yoshin, King Saiyang is not only Hyang's ruler but also his father, bound to understand him deeply. That night, the king and Hyang delved into intricate discussions. At one point, the king asked, puzzled, separate military positions, you say? But if we do that, what role will the civil officials have? Hyang replied, it won't work if only the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Personnel handle the military budget and personnel matters. What if we allow civil officials to oversee both? The king paused, looked at Hyang, and asked, would separation truly improve things? Yes, Hyang affirmed. Military officials should focus solely on military matters. If we implement this, we can avoid the return of a military government. The king's expression grew serious. Even with me here? That's correct, Hyang continued. Such a system existed once, as in the Japanese Empire. We need to be cautious. There's no guarantee future generations will be as capable. The king nodded thoughtfully. All right, you're right. We should also shift focus to local military forces, now that the central army has taken over certain roles. Together, they discussed throughout the night. The next morning, the chief chef entered and announced, Your Highness, breakfast is ready. Papers cluttered the desk as the king looked up. Hyang, would you like to join me? Yes, gladly, Hyang replied. Meanwhile, at the Lee family estate, a young man named Lee Sunji sat grinning at his desk until his father stormed in, startling him. Sneaking around with nonsense instead of studying again? His father barked. No, father, it's not what you think. Sunji stammered, trying to hide his book. But his father snatched it up, seeing its title Heavenly Calculation of India, and his expression darkened. Math? Again? He said, enraged. Sunji attempted to explain. Father, this method simplifies equations and calculations, making work much faster. Isn't that amazing? This nonsense, his father scolded, nearly in tears. You're wasting time on arithmetic tricks and associating with merchants. But father, these merchants are respected, and they taught me these valuable methods. Arithmetic isn't just a game. Merchants pay taxes. They're a vital part of our kingdom, Sunji argued. Enough, his father snapped. A scholar's path is the official exams. If you don't pass this time, at least take the talent exam. Do you understand? Sunji hesitated, then replied, Yes, father. Meanwhile, in the council chambers, the prince addressed the gathered ministers. What matter brings you here? The chief minister explained, Your Highness, recent restructuring has left us with shortages across all roles. The prince stroked his beard thoughtfully. If this had been presented earlier, we could have resolved it already. But let's hear your thoughts. The left minister spoke up. Your Highness, we could hold an impromptu exam to recruit new talents. The prince raised a hand. Enough. There's no need to continue on that point. I'm not opposed to exams, but preliminary exams have already been held, and grading is underway. I'll discuss appointments and a supplemental exam with you all. Overjoyed, the court officials widened their eyes. Oh, they exclaimed. The prince continued, due to the current urgency, I'll temporarily replace the doctoral exam with a special recruitment exam to select outstanding talents. I'll increase the number of successful candidates by 500. The left minister was stunned, bowing deeply. Your Highness, your wisdom is truly unparalleled. We'll discuss details in the next meeting, the prince declared. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on military reform. The officials responded in unison. We follow your orders, Your Highness. Back at the Lee estate, Sunji's mother prayed earnestly, Heavenly spirits, grant Sunji success in his exam. She then turned to her husband. Stop pacing and making noise. You'll ruin the prayer's power. Startled, he apologized. Yes, I'm sorry. When Sunji returned, exhausted, his father said, You must have worked hard today. Go and rest. Watching him leave, his parents whispered, This special exam must have been difficult. In his study, Sunji eagerly returned to his books. Days without studying have driven me mad, he muttered, getting to work. In the throne hall, the prince concluded the council meeting on the special exam. Suddenly, Hyang raised his hand. Your Highness, I'd like to propose adding mathematics to the exam. The left minister immediately objected. Impossible. This is a preliminary exam meant to test Confucian knowledge, not mathematics. Hyang narrowed his eyes. It's him again. The king stroked his beard, reflecting. Just then, the Minister of Revenue spoke up. Your Highness, if I may say, the Ministry of Revenue also needs officials skilled in mathematics. The Minister of Public Works added, Our recruits lack the necessary technical skills, and organizing even the simplest tasks is time-consuming. The right minister chimed in, Your Highness, this issue affects the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Justice as well. We need individuals with mathematical skills to effectively investigate and process cases. In the same vein, the Ministry of War needed people who could manage military records and inventory, counting and recounting arrows, organizing and classifying supplies. After hearing this, the king asked, I see, but does this mean our kingdom is truly that short on skilled people? How have we managed all this time? The left minister, flustered, responded, Forgive me, Your Highness, but the issue isn't the lack of personnel, it's the lack of budget. The king clicked his tongue in frustration. For heaven's sake. Turning to Hyang, he asked, So, how many people does the Imperial Research Institute require? At least 20, Your Highness, Hyang replied. The king raised an eyebrow. 20? Can't we recruit them through the talent exam? Hyang hesitated. The skill levels of candidates vary greatly, Your Highness. The king sighed, holding his head in frustration. True, if someone passes the preliminary exam, they must be talented, even at a young age. After a moment of thought, he spoke up. So, this is where we stand. Left minister, do you still oppose including mathematics in the preliminary exam? The left minister answered without hesitation, Yes, Your Highness. The officials held their breath, watching him carefully. After what felt like an eternity, the left minister finally said, As a Confucian scholar, I stand firm. But for the peace of our nation, I'll set aside my objections this time. The king nodded. You're right, the real issue is budget. He mentally calculated the provincial tax revenue and the income from various departments, then asked, Crown Prince, can we not reduce that number from 20? Realizing that pressing further might yield nothing, Hyang quickly conceded. I follow your command, father. The king then issued an order. Increase the number of candidates who pass the preliminary exam this time, and as the Crown Prince suggested, include mathematics to meet the needs of the many departments. Everyone, adjust your department's personnel requirements based on the Crown Prince's proposal and report back to me. Have the numbers, make sacrifices, and aim for harmony. The officials responded in unison. We obey your command, Your Highness. Hyang's eyes brightened, already strategizing how to find the best talents. A few days later at the Lee estate, a servant called urgently, "Master, government officials have arrived to see you." Sunji's parents rushed out, hardly daring to believe it. Indeed, it was true. Sunji's father, overcome with joy, ran to the study, flinging open the door and startling Sunji, who quickly tried to hide his work. Tears in his eyes, his father exclaimed, "Sunji, you passed the preliminary exam. Well done, my son." He shouted, "We must celebrate. Prepare a feast." But while his father rejoiced, Sunji, deep in mathematical thought, sighed. "With the final exam approaching, I'll have to put arithmetic aside for now. These unsolved problems will have to wait." Meanwhile, Hyang met with Scholar Trong. "Today, we discuss something urgent. This competition to select the best candidates will be intense." Scholar Trong nodded. "Indeed, there's immense pressure on the Ministry of Rights, which oversees this." Undeterred, Hyang laid out his plan. "I'd like to appoint you, Scholar Trong, as chief examiner. Your mathematical expertise is widely respected. If we coordinate carefully, nominating you shouldn't be an issue." Scholar Trong, still skeptical, asked, "Will the other departments agree?" Continuing, Hyang explained, "Each department will nominate one chief examiner for the final exam. This will encourage consensus." Detailing his plan further, he added, "All exams will be graded in front of the chief examiners. This plan, called UN, will select the top 5 scholars in mathematics for the Research Institute." Scholar Trong, impressed, replied with confidence, "Understood, Your Highness. We will succeed." Soon after, the final exam took place. Outside the Hantan government office, 100 scholars gathered. The examiner called, "We'll distribute numbered tokens for seating. If you receive more than 1 token, you'll be disqualified." The scholars jostled eagerly for position, with one Huan squeezed between 2 towering men like a slice of bread. The examiner, holding up the tokens, announced, "Please form a line." As the crowd surged forward, a group of young noblemen watched from a corner. "See that big guy? That's my servant," one said proudly. "If we don't get a low number, we'll lose the advantage." Watching the chaotic scramble, Lee Sunji grew anxious, muttering, "Hang in there, Ruck gone." The examiners shouted, "Stop! We will distribute tokens in the order of the line." Lee Sunji sighed with relief, realizing the scramble was over. "Wait, this is just the beginning." Meanwhile, 2 noblemen bragged, "We'll definitely get seats up front." Laughing, they exchanged congratulatory remarks. The examiner's voice rang out, "Please line up according to your token number." Seeing Ruck gone bruised from the scuffle, Lee Sunji said gratefully, "Thank you. You worked hard." Taking his token, Lee Sunji's face fell. He was seated at 89 out of 100. "So far back, I'll barely see anything from here," he thought, anxiety growing. The examiner called out, "Seats 80 through 90 at the back, raise your hands if you can hear." Lee Sunji raised his hand, thinking, "I can't let myself get distracted. I just have to try my best." The examiners began the ceremony, reading a decree from His Highness. As the prince's voice echoed through the hall, Lee Sunji marveled. It sounds so clear, as if he's right next to me. The first day's exam focused on the 5 classics and 4 books. The next day, the examiner announced, "Today, we focus on arithmetic." Lee Sunji's heart skipped. "Mathematics," he whispered. Other scholars exchanged startled glances, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Hearing the murmurs, the examiners snapped, "Silence! This has been decreed by His Highness and approved by the ministers. Anyone who objects may leave now." Silence fell, and the examiner continued, "Proceed in groups of 5. Lee Sunji, far at the back, sighed with relief. "It'll be a while before my turn." After the first day ended, the scholars returned for the arithmetic exam. The examiner said, "The arithmetic portion will be presented directly, so remain seated." Receiving his exam paper, Lee Sunji's heart raced. What kind of problems await me? As he saw the questions, his eyes sparkled with excitement. The exam presented innovative, single-sheet, horizontal problems. Impressive, he thought. "The time for this exam is 2 hours, the examiner announced. Studying the questions with a grin, Lee Sunji felt his resolve grow. This exam could shape my future. Time to give it my all. And with a determined heart, he focused, ready to meet the challenge head-on. "Ah, So the real challenge lies here, Lee Sun-ji muttered, returning to the Lee estate late in the evening. As he stepped in, he announced, "I'm home." His parents rushed to greet him eagerly. "Lee Sun-ji, how did it go? Was it tough?" They asked, clearly anxious. "It was challenging," he admitted, "but I did my best." His parents beamed with pride. Then, with a slight grin, he added, "Arithmetic was included. I heard His Highness added it himself." His father looked bewildered. "Mathematics? Really?" Meanwhile, his mother was thrilled. The gods must be on our side. 2 days later, in the palace, an AI voice announced, "Sir, grading is complete, and scores are listed from highest to lowest." "Thank you," said one of the officials. "Any issues during supervision or management?" "None at all," replied the AI. "I was concerned about the arithmetic portion, but everything went smoothly." "What about those at the top of the rankings?" another official asked. "It would be excellent to secure the top scorer, wouldn't it?" Nearby, a young scholar pondered this. A chance like this is rare. Suddenly, he slammed the table, startling the officials around him. Grabbing the results board, he started to march forward, only to be halted by the Assistant Minister of Revenue. "Stop! What are you doing?" The Assistant Minister demanded, surprised by the scholar's behavior. "It's good he's here," the scholar thought, smirking. He remembered Hyang's words. The higher the opponent's rank, the greater the advantage. A few days earlier, the Minister of Revenue had rushed breathlessly into the imperial court. Out of breath, he stood at the door as officials turned to look. The right minister asked, "Is something the matter?" The Minister of Revenue struggled to speak. "I've received news." But before he could finish, the Chief Minister of State interrupted. "Is it about the Chief Examiner appointments? We already know. You arrived just in time." The Minister of Revenue pulled out a document. This contains the list of examiners for drafting questions, grading, and supervising the final exam. The left minister stroked his beard thoughtfully. "With the addition of mathematics, this exam will be demanding. But why appoint young Ing as chief examiner?" The Chief Minister of State agreed. "Yes, why him? Young Zhou and scholar Young Ing are the top mathematicians and close allies of the Crown Prince. Clearly, His Highness wants the best." The left minister asked, "Isn't this an abuse of power?" The Minister of Revenue clenched his fists in frustration. "Exactly. This raises ethical concerns." In another part of the palace, the prince, deep in thought, looked up as the chief chef entered to announce several ministers requesting an audience. "Let them in," he said. The 3 officials entered, greeted him, and the Chief Minister of State cautiously began. "Your Highness, we wish to discuss the appointment of the chief examiner. It's an ethical matter." The prince, sensing the gravity, replied, "I understand and am reviewing it carefully." Encouraged, the chief minister pressed, "Does that mean you oppose their appointments?" The prince paused. "But if I don't appoint them, who do you propose as alternatives? Aren't they the most qualified?" The officials fell silent, unable to offer an alternative. The prince smiled to himself, recalling a conversation with Hyang. "Father, I don't agree with this decision," Hyang had protested. The prince replied, "I understand your efforts to promote mathematics, but appointing Director General Yang Zhou makes sense. Scholar Yang Ingji, however, is still young. Appointing him may make it appear as if you're leveraging your status for personal gain. This could put you in a vulnerable position." Though disappointed, Hyang then proposed, "What if we let each department appoint a chief examiner?" In the throne hall, the Chief Minister of State, puzzled, asked, "Are you suggesting each department nominate a chief examiner? That would give us 7 examiners." The second left minister, to everyone's surprise, agreed. "Yes, this may be the best solution, Your Highness." The prince, hearing their consensus, issued his order. "Then proceed at once. The sooner, the better." As they left, the chief minister turned to the second left minister. "Why the rush?" The second left minister replied, "This is our best course. Besides, with each department choosing an examiner, the Ministry of Personnel will see this as an opportunity. Their staffing issues make them the most significant voice in this matter." The ministers continued, while the second left minister silently reflected, "This must be the Crown Prince's idea." An image of Hyang's smug expression flashed in his mind. He turned to the right minister. "Gather the 6 ministries immediately. If we're not careful, the Crown Prince will attract the brightest minds, excluding the Ministry of Public Works. This is a battle between us and him. Meanwhile, Hyang met with Scholar Trong. As you know, my proposal has been accepted. Father understands our intentions. Curious, Scholar Trong asked, why does a higher opponent's rank give us an advantage? Hyang explained, if they make mistakes, it increases their chances of failure. Since Scholar Yang will serve as chief examiner, they'll likely appoint high-ranking officials in response. This is precisely what we want. They'll focus on literature, leaving arithmetic largely to us. The scholar looked puzzled. I understand, Your Highness, but what did you mean by deal? Realizing his slip, Hyang chuckled. It's a Western word. Deal simply means agreement. The scholar repeated, deal. Interesting. Strange. But I like it. Back in the present, as the Assistant Minister of Revenue tried to hold back Scholar Truong, their disagreement intensified. The Research Institute needs people skilled in mathematics, insisted the Assistant Minister, with others around nodding in agreement. We all do. This is outrageous, muttered another. Scholar Young, glancing at the score list, responded, fine. Then I'll take the top 5 and the bottom 5 candidates. I am following the Crown Prince's orders, after all. No, we need skilled people too, protested the group. Seeing their opposition, Scholar Young relented. All right, I'll take the top 8. Outside the royal city gates, candidates were anxiously waiting. Is the list posted yet? Not yet, someone replied. Lee Sun-ji, standing at the very back, sighed. There are so many people in front of me, I can't see anything. Slowly, the large gates creaked open, and 2 officials emerged, approaching the notice board. The crowd's anticipation grew. The officials brushed glue onto the board and posted the results. Instantly, the crowd surged forward. The successful candidates list, shouted a man in yellow robes, sparking a rush of excitement and nerves. I passed, shouted one candidate. Me too, another exclaimed. Meanwhile, Lee Sun-ji squinted, trying to see, but the crowd blocked his view. Suddenly, a familiar voice called, please make way. Before he could react, Lee Sun-ji found himself hoisted up. Ah, Jordan, he exclaimed in surprise. Jordan grinned. Can you see now, young master? Lee Sun-ji laughed. Am I not too heavy? Not at all, Jordan replied. Since I couldn't secure you a spot, I'll lift you up. Hurry. Check the results. Still wobbling, Lee muttered. It's easier said than done. I still can't see clearly. Just then, a court official with a loudspeaker called, please keep quiet. Those whose names I call, step forward. Yong Hen from Gason, Lee Sun-ji from ENIU, Lee Kinjin from Bai, Mr. Sunday. Jordan beamed. I think he just called your name, young master. Yes, that's me, replied Lee, making his way to the official holding a clipboard. I am Lee Sun-ji from ENIU. My hometown is Ion Seoul. Here's my exam badge. The official nodded. Correct. Stand here beside me. As candidates were counted, 2 young men nearby murmured, what are they doing? Is it the shooting range? Others looked on, puzzled. No idea. The crowd soon split into 2 groups, those invited to the palace and those who failed, some weeping uncontrollably. I'm 40 years old now. What will I tell my family? In the throne hall, the king reviewed the results. A total of 185 candidates passed the final exam. We increased the passing number, but it's still lower than expected. The left minister stepped forward. Some passed the practical exams but were disqualified for scoring below 20 in mathematics. The prince frowned. Isn't that wasteful? Yes, Your Highness, the minister replied. But training them from the basics would require extensive resources. The king, striking his knee, declared, I understand. Those who passed are carefully selected talents. Put them to good use. Now, how do you plan to manage their ranks and assignments? An official explained, we'll rank them based on academic and work performance, then assign them to the 6 ministries. After a 3-month probation, they'll receive official appointments. The king nodded. Good. But will there be any disputes over distribution among the ministries? No, Your Highness. We've nearly reached full agreement, replied the right minister. That's promising, said the king. But what if some wish to advance to Sunkian 1? The left minister answered, they must start from the lowest rank. Their contributions here would be more valuable than studying at Sunkian 1. Besides, many changes are coming to Sunkian 1. All scholars there will soon be removed from office. But some might disagree. Outside, an official addressed the candidates. After training, you will begin work. A chubby scholar raised his hand, asking, "If I wish to take the imperial examination, can I still go to Sunkian 1? The official replied, "Starting this year, the system is changing. Scholars at Sunkian 1 will be removed from office, and only government officials can progress that way. The path to high positions now requires skills and ranks gained through various promotions." The official clicked his tongue and added, "Without skill, you won't be promoted. In fact, you might be dismissed before getting that chance." The chubby scholar raised his hand again. "So, I can't just take the imperial exam?" The official, holding back his irritation, thought, "If someone this incompetent were my colleague, it'd be a nightmare." Outwardly, he maintained composure. "Did you even listen? To advance, you need skill." Stunned, the scholar mumbled, "Wait, am I being expelled?" The official slammed his hand down. "Dismissed, fool." But the scholar wasn't done. "Do you even know who I am?" he retorted. "Who exactly are you?" asked the official, exasperated. The scholar puffed his chest proudly. "The former Minister of Public Works is my great-uncle, and my cousin works in the Ministry of Justice." Nearby, General Jian, who had been observing, raised an eyebrow. "In the end, you're still nobody," scoffed General Jian. The scholar, red with anger, shouted, "What did you say? You arrogant fool!" Losing all patience, General Jian turned to the guards. "Go to the Tihing Fu and bring Songchapnia here immediately. Tell them General Jian from the Ministry of Personnel ordered it." After issuing the command, he turned to the flustered scholar, pointing with a sneer. "So where's your power now? Power? I can dismiss you on a whim. Understand? And by royal decree. Got that? The power behind me is His Highness, the Prince." Just then, Songchapnia arrived, catching General Jian off guard. "Ah, well said, General Jian," Songchapnia remarked, brimming with fury. "Oh, Songchapnia, how did you get here so quickly?" General Jian asked. "I anticipated something like this and had my men stationed nearby," replied Songchapnia, a high-ranking official of the Tihing Fu, a powerful institution with the authority to investigate and prosecute corruption. He commanded his men, "What are you waiting for? Take this insolent fool away." As the chubby scholar was dragged off, he cried out, "Please, just once. Spare me, I beg you." Meanwhile, General Jian turned to the successful candidates and reminded them sternly, "If any of you show misconduct during training or probation, lag behind in your work, or cause trouble, you'll be expelled immediately. Understood?" At the Tihing Fu headquarters, the atmosphere was tense as two officials spoke. "Songchapnia, I heard there was an incident during the announcement of the exam results?" asked the Grand Inspector. "Yes, Grand Inspector. The individuals have received the documents you sent." "Good. Now deliver this as well," the Grand Inspector instructed. Songchapnia, taking a golden pen bestowed by His Highness, replied with a sly grin, "Leave it to me. I sense some corruption here that needs cleansing." In the throne hall, the prince reviewed a newly submitted memorial, his hands trembling with anger as he read. "They've barely passed the exam and are already so arrogant? How powerful must they feel?" The prince glanced at the officials. "Isn't that scholar around the same age as Rio and Yoon?" "Yes, Your Highness," they replied in unison. The prince clenched his fists in fury. "No, this isn't just formality. If there's corruption in the court, I need to question the forces behind it. Chief Minister, have the GI Camfu investigate the family members he mentioned." The Chief Minister quickly responded, "As you command, Your Highness." Meanwhile, a group of young scholars, led by an official, were making their way through the palace. "Where are we headed, sir?" asked Li Sunji, surprised when the official responded, "You're going to the Eastern Palace." "What? Why are we, the ones who just passed, being sent to the Crown Prince's residence?" The official explained, "You're all assigned to work at the Crown Prince's Research Institute." "Really?" they exclaimed, a mix of excitement and nerves. The official reassured them, "Don't worry, even the bravest feel nervous going there." Soon, they arrived at the Research Institute. An AI voice greeted them. "Welcome, everyone." The deputy director of the institute approached, bowing in greeting. "I am the deputy director. It's an honor to meet you all." The young scholars bowed respectfully. "Greetings, sir." The deputy director noted their bright expressions, thinking, their enthusiasm will change soon enough. He chuckled quietly and gestured to the chairs. "Please have a seat." "Yes, sir," they replied, settling in. Lee Sun-ji gripped his chair, heart racing with anticipation. This was just like the excitement he felt as a child when he first encountered mathematics in his grandfather's attic. The deputy director broke his thoughts. "Now, does anyone here know the Indian method of arithmetic?" Lee Sun-ji raised his hand. "I do, sir." Surprised, the deputy director asked, "How did you learn it? It hasn't been widely spread." "I learned it from merchants, sir." The deputy director glanced around. "Anyone else?" Seeing no other response, he turned back to Lee. "So you're the only one who knows it. What's your name?" "My name is Lee Sun-ji, sir." The deputy director raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the Lee Sun-ji, nearly failing on day one, but topping the mathematics exam." He assigned Lee a task. "Very well, help teach the others the Indian method. Then you'll continue with advanced mathematics before moving to specialized training. You have a month and a half for this training. For now, return home, inform your families, and gather your belongings. Then return to Hansong. The Crown Prince and I have high expectations for each of you." The young scholars stood, replying, "We will do our best." Late that afternoon, excitement filled the Lee estate. "Sun-ji's back!" his mother exclaimed, rushing to greet him. "Let's go inside first," Lee Sun-ji said, leading his parents in as he prepared to share everything that had happened. As night fell and curfew neared, soldiers began patrolling the streets. Inside the Lee household, the family sat in deep conversation. Sun-ji's father, still in disbelief, asked, "Where did you say?" "It's called the Institute for the Advancement of Science and Technology, an independent research institute under the Crown Prince," Lee replied. His parents looked at each other, astonished, before hugging him with joy. "Oh my, you've done well, my son. Working for the Crown Prince? This is worth celebrating with a feast." Meanwhile, in the Eastern Palace, Hyang reviewed the mathematics exam results, muttering, "Perhaps father should have taken charge of this." The next morning, at the prince's residence, the chief chef announced, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince is here to see you." "Let him in," the prince replied. Hyang entered, knelt, and greeted his father. "Did you sleep well, father?" "Yes. And you, Hyang?" the king replied, noting a hint of unease in his son. "What's on your mind now?" he asked with a touch of humor. "I've been jump roping today, you know." Hyang smiled nervously. "Ah, it's not that, father. Actually, it's about the recent exam review results. I wanted to thank you for overseeing it." The king, leaning on his hand, chuckled. "Oh, so it's about that? This is the first thanks I've received from the Research Institute. So what is it you wanted to ask me about this morning? Go ahead." Meanwhile, at the Research Institute, Jiang Baitoa was lost in his work, pondering, does this method really work? Suddenly, a voice called out, "Jiang Baitoa, are you here?" He looked up. "Is something wrong?" "The Crown Prince has summoned you," the messenger replied. Without hesitation, Jiang left. When he arrived, he found Hyang waiting. "Crown Prince." Jiang greeted with a bow. Without turning, Hyang said, "Jiang Baitoa, I've received the results of our recent review. This is the first audit since the institute was founded." Hyang turned, his expression serious. "Before you say anything, you'll need to apologize. I've arranged for you to change into formal attire." "Yes, Your Highness," Jiang replied, confused. Why is His Highness so cold? Did I make a serious mistake? Hyang urged him along. "Hurry up." "Yes, Your Highness," Jiang responded, still puzzled. Suddenly, Hyang smiled. "Ah, just in time." 3 military officers approached and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness. How are you?" Hyang glanced at Jiang. "These are the military captains who will soon work as craftsmen." Jiang's heart sank. Is His Highness planning to replace me? He thought back to their first meeting, which had been rather humorous, and wondered what he had done wrong. Hyang's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Father, they're here." Jiang realized where he was and saw Heng bowing to the king, who was seated on the throne. "Thank you, father, for granting my request." The king nodded. "It's nothing. A king should do this. You've done well, Crown Prince." Startled, Jiang and the officers quickly knelt. "We greet your majesty, the emperor." The king spoke kindly. "Don't say such things. You're all citizens of my realm. How could you be considered lowly? Besides, haven't you all worked diligently over the past year?" He gestured to the royal chef. "Khan, read the decree." The royal chef lifted the scroll and began. "By order of His Highness, Jiang Yi and Shun of the Research Institute is promoted to the 5th rank." Jiang Bait Toa's eyes widened in shock. "What?" He looked at Heng, who met his gaze with a proud smile. Tears welled up in Jiang's eyes. "The Crown Prince wasn't planning to dismiss me after all." The royal chef continued. "Furthermore, Captains Chambong Gompale, Bak Yen Min Su, and Choi Chiller Dug will be promoted to the 8th rank and will now work at the Research Institute." The officers bowed deeply, moved to tears. "Thank you, Your Highness." When the formalities were over, the king addressed them. "Your promotions are in recognition of your service, but also to remind you of the responsibility that comes with it. The Crown Prince and I have high expectations for you." Heng exchanged a look with his father. "Thank you, father. This will motivate them to work even harder and unlock more of their potential." The next morning, Lee Sun-ji was in an excellent mood as he strolled outside, swinging his arms happily. "What a beautiful day," he thought. Dakan approached. "Young master, no. My lord, how did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Lee Sun-ji replied cheerfully. Dakan chuckled. Jordan said everyone else had trouble sleeping last night. Lee Sun-ji's parents had gifted him a small house with rooms for Jordan, his nanny, and himself. "This is the beginning of my journey," he thought, feeling inspired. "I must keep moving forward." At the Research Institute, the deputy director welcomed the group. "It's wonderful to see you all again. It's been a month and a half, hasn't it?" The young scholars replied in unison. "We're glad to see you in good health as well, sir." Suddenly, a voice outside made everyone turn. "These are the scholars who passed the exam, correct?" The deputy director replied, "Yes, Your Highness." The scholars' eyes widened in shock. "The Crown Prince? Could it really be him?" The Crown Prince approached, dignified. Recognizing him, the scholars quickly bowed. "We respectfully greet the Crown Prince." He nodded, looking at each scholar. "You are Han Ian-gu, correct?" "Yes, Your Highness, it is an honor," Han replied. Moving to the next, he continued, "And you are Park Jae-hun?" "Yes, Your Highness, an honor." The reason he knew their faces was a favor he'd asked of Jong Bait Toa the day before. "I'd like you to sketch the scholars' faces for me," he had said. "Focus on capturing their distinct features." Recalling that conversation, Heng trusted Jong's keen eye. As Heng called out each name, the scholars grew emotional. He finally stopped in front of Lee Sun-ji. "And you are?" But Lee Sun-ji was distracted, breathing in a familiar scent. "I recognize this smell." "Lee Sun-ji," Heng said, smiling. Startled, Lee Sun-ji quickly bowed. "Yes, Your Highness. It is a great honor." Heng praised him. "Your performance in the exam was remarkable." Lee Sun-ji. Embarrassed, Lee replied, "You're too kind, Your Highness. I'm just an ordinary scholar." Heng glanced at Jiang Bait Toa and said, "Don't be so modest." Even Lord Dong Cho remarked on the exam's difficulty. Jiang added, "The questions were created by a mathematics expert, which made some of them challenging." After greeting everyone, Heng encouraged them, "I believe you all have great potential." The scholars, filled with enthusiasm, replied, "It is an honor, Your Highness." Heng then turned to young scholar and said, "You will supervise the training of the students. Let's begin immediately." "Yes, Your Highness. I will do my best," young scholar replied. As they were led to the lecture hall, young scholar explained, "This will be your workspace. Each table seats 3 people. Scholar Lee Sun-ji, you'll sit at the back by yourself." Standing on the platform, he continued, "From now on, you are no longer merely scholars but apprentices of the Roshan Institute of Science and Development. Address your supervisors as professors." "Understood." "Yes, Professor," they replied. "Do you truly understand?" he asked. "Yes, Professor." Young scholar introduced their instructor. "Please welcome Professor Hassan, who will teach number theory." Professor Hassan entered, and the students gasped. "Isn't that him?" one whispered. "The legendary strategist?" Young scholar rebuked them. "How disrespectful. Professor Hassan is a master from the kingdom of Antic, personally summoned by His Highness. Misconduct will affect your grades, and those with low scores will be expelled." The students quickly apologized. "We're sorry. We'll remember." Professor Hassan nodded and introduced himself. "I am Hassan. During your training, you may call me Professor. I will teach you about Arabic numerals and the language of Yashin." Lee Sun-ji thought, he must be the one who created the mathematics exam. "I can't wait to learn." As the day ended, Professor Hassan said, "That's all for today. We will continue tomorrow." "Yes, Professor." "Thank you," the students replied. "Professor," the students replied. As Lee Sun-ji was walking, he heard someone call out from behind. It was Park Jae-hun. "Scholar Lee Sun-ji." Lee turned and asked, "Are you calling me senior?" Park Jae-hun introduced himself. "I'm Park Jae-hun from Ronaldo. It seems the others in class aren't too talkative. Let's help each other out." "Yeah," Lee replied warmly. "Ah, I see. Nice to meet you, senior." Two others soon joined them. "I'm Park Bowie from Junchul," one said. "And I'm Kim Jang-soo from Han-seon. Let's work together," the other added. "Yes, I'm Lee Sun-ji," he replied. One of them piped up, "Aren't you the top student in mathematics? Could you help me out? I didn't understand anything today." Lee smiled. "I'd be happy to." Meanwhile, Han Ian-gu watched from a distance, displeased. "Humph, things are different now," he muttered. "I really dislike those Korean-American families." Later that evening, in a brightly lit study, Hyang discussed the day's events with the Research Institute staff. Today was the first day of classes. "What's your overall impression?" "It's the first day, so everyone's quite enthusiastic. No issues so far," someone replied. Professor Hassan added, "Student Lee Sun-ji's understanding is exceptional. My younger brother, who's traveling, would be thrilled to meet him." Young scholar chimed in, "Lee Sun-ji's skills are impressive, and the other students tend to gather around him for help." Hyang stroked his chin thoughtfully. "If they motivate each other to improve, that's wonderful. But there might be envy among them. I hope you'll guide them carefully so that everyone has a chance to grow." "Yes, Your Highness," they all responded in unison. The next day, Professor Hassan clapped a stack of assignments in his hands. "It's been a tough week, but well done on this exam. With this, our class on the Indian method concludes." Kim Jang-do and Park Hui sighed in relief. "That was so difficult. It's almost funny," Kim laughed. "Agreed. Way harder than I expected," Park added. Kim Jang-do turned to Lee. "I finished thanks to the scholar here tutoring me." "Thanks, Lee Sun-ji. Don't mention it. I learned a lot from helping you," Lee replied. Han Ian-gu scoffed. "We don't even have the results yet. Why are you all so excited?" Suddenly, Professor Hassan cleared his throat. "I've heard it all. Lee Sun-ji, you've been the top student and a great help to your classmates." Han Ian-gu muttered under his breath, growing bitter. "Lee this, Lee that," Professor Hassan continued. "Some of you still haven't grasped everything. Those who score below 40 will have to take supplementary lessons. And if there's no improvement, you'll be expelled." The students fell silent, stunned. Professor Hassan announced, "This afternoon, we'll begin specialized training. It's more challenging than the Indian method, so don't give up halfway." "Yes, Professor," Lee replied, thinking, "I had reservations at first because of our different backgrounds. But I've realized that numbers and symbols are universal, transcending language." He glanced at Hassan with respect, silently thanking him. "Thank you, Professor. No, Master." Hassan, sensing something deeper, met Lee's gaze with a thoughtful expression. Later, Hyang reviewed the test results. "These are the scores for the Indian method exam?" he asked. Professor Hassan replied, "Yes, a bit lower than the final exam, but no one scored below 40. Hassan added, "It's all thanks to Lee Sun-ji. He's done excellent work." Fired up with determination, Hyang clenched his fist. "Then let's push their specialized training even further." "Yes, Your Highness," Hassan replied. Just then, the lecture hall doors swung open, and the students gasped. The deputy director of the institute entered, accompanied by an aide carrying a stack of books. Place them on the table," the deputy instructed. Thank you. You've worked hard. The students watched curiously as the deputy addressed them. Since your first day, you've worked hard. Now I will oversee your specialized training. Step up and take these books. He continued, this book covers the recovery process after last year's flood, but it's not entirely accurate. Your task is to analyze the errors, note the reasons for correction, and prepare a report. Take your time and work carefully. Looking at the book, Lee grinned. Oh, I see the problem. I'll have to adjust the statistical data using the Indian method, then perform the inverse calculation. Nearby, Hainong-ju grew frustrated, muttering, my head's about to explode. I don't get any of this. Where do I even start? Just as he was about to leave, Kim Jang-do patted his shoulder. Hang in there. If you want to work in the royal court, you need to endure this. Lee stood up to help Han Ian-gu. Convert the totals into ratios, then perform the inverse calculation. Focus on the smaller numbers first. After assisting his classmates, Lee submitted his work to the professor. I've finished, including the corrections. Already, the deputy director reviewed Lee's report, nodding with approval. I'll go over this. Return to your seat. Instead of sitting, Lee continued helping others with their assignments. Observing this, the deputy director sighed to himself. It's no wonder Lee Sun-ji gets so much attention. That night, as the results were announced, Hyang spoke to the institute members. These are the results after 3 months of training. I won't forget your efforts. The deputy director and young scholar replied, please don't say that, Your Highness. It's all for the institute's future. Hyang turned to the deputy director. Thank you. How is the specialized training going? Stroking his beard, the deputy director replied, per your orders, we've had them apply their skills to real-world scenarios. Even during training, Lee Sun-ji stood out as an expert, helping others and forming study groups. Professor Hassan added, during the Indian method lessons, Sun-ji helped weaker students improve. Those who took supplementary classes have made considerable progress, thanks to him. Hearing this, Hyang thought aloud, a research group? Huh? That's wonderful. So, all that's left is the appointment process. Yes, young scholar confirmed. They'll gain experience in various departments over the next 3 months, then receive official appointments based on their strengths. Hyang, satisfied, said, so, 3 more months. This follows the tradition from Yoshian's time. Suddenly, the deputy director asked, what does I don't care mean? Caught off guard, Hyang laughed. Well, it's a Western term. It essentially means that seniors and juniors should work together and endure for 3 months. The group, intrigued, smiled, repeating the term. A Western phrase? Fascinating. If 3 months is enough, then that sounds reasonable, one suggested. Let's officially call it that. Hyang, ignoring their chatter, muttered, I really need to stop slipping into modern slang. Turning back to him, the deputy director addressed the prince seriously. Your Highness, while they're on probation, they'll still need ranks, titles, and emblems for Area 51. I mentioned this in the report, but I believe it's best if you decide. Becoming serious once more, Hyang replied, yes, they'll observe different departments, but not everyone will be placed in Area 51. We'll select 4 to go, starting with student Lee Sun-ji. The deputy director asked, then what rank should we assign to student Lee Sun-ji? The following morning, at the council hall, the king reviewed the petitions, raising an eyebrow. The 5th rank for a scholar? Isn't that a bit high? Standing below, Hyang replied, scholars from Sun Kian 1 are assigned the 6th rank. The king interrupted. Exactly. If the top scholars reach only the 6th rank, doesn't the 5th seem too high? Bowing low, Hyang responded, I believe he's deserving, father. The king remained unconvinced. If this is based only on academic results, that alone doesn't make it an accomplishment. Show me what he has achieved. The highest rank I've ever assigned to a student is the 6th. Hyang tried to press on, but, Father Dash, the king raised a hand to stop him. Hold on, Crown Prince. I know you're diligent, fair in rewards and punishment, but fairness is the core. This person, Lee Sun-ji, may be talented, but do you believe other departments will accept him at the 5th rank? Hyang, after hearing his father's words, paused. The king continued, they won't recognize his talent. They'll assume he succeeded because of your research institute. I wouldn't hesitate if not for this. but for fairness, he'll hold the 6th rank. You understand my reasoning? Hyang, feeling humbled, replied, Yes, father, I understand. The king nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad you understand. My duty is not only to care for the people but to uphold fairness. In the end, Lee Sun-ji was assigned the 6th rank. Nevertheless, he was recognized as the highest achiever in the institute and one of the top trainees. In the new Inang Sandal program, divided into 4 groups, he was placed in the first group for practical training in Area 51. Elsewhere, Lee Sun-ji looked around curiously and asked, This doesn't look like the palace. Where are we going, Professor? His guide replied, I'm no longer Professor. Now that training has ended, just call me Senior. Yes, Senior, Lee Sun-ji replied. Jiang Bait Toa added, Call me Senior Choi. Here, age and titles don't matter. Only skills do. That's the rule set by the Crown Prince. The students, surprised, approached a heavily guarded area. We're nearly there, the young scholar said. This is Area 51. The doors opened, and 2 guards saluted as they entered. Hyang stepped out, smiling. Welcome, our future. The scholars quickly bowed. Greetings, Crown Prince. All right, enough formalities. Hyang waved them off and held up a golden badge. Without this, you can't enter. Don't lose it. Lee Sun-ji took the badge, feeling its unexpected weight. Hyang explained, This is the foundation of my dream to advance our nation. Join me in making that a reality. As they entered, the guards locked the doors behind them. Lee Sun-ji, noting the tight security, thought, This is serious. Hyang led them through a quiet, wooded path until they reached a clearing, where soldiers were firing guns and explosions erupted nearby. The scholars recoiled in shock. Hyang smirked at their reaction. Welcome to Area 51. Shortly after, General Choi Hai-sen introduced himself. I'll supervise your work here. Our national defense relies on weaponry, so your role is to understand and improve our systems. The officers taught them about firearms, cannons, and other weapons. Exhausted by the end, the scholars collapsed into a corner. One side, the institute was tough, but Area 51 is on another level. I've barely been home all month. Just then, Director Young opened a window and shouted, If you're tired, take a break. The scholars snapped to attention as he continued, You passed the exam, so either work or go back to training. They fell silent, glancing nervously at each other. Director Young advised, Don't think of this as hard work. Find joy in it. Both the king and the prince will recognize your efforts if you succeed. Director, called Lee Sun-ji from inside. The scholars peeked in, marveling. He works non-stop, like a madman. Haenong Ji-yu, clearly displeased, muttered, I don't like him at all. One day, as Lee carried documents, Han Ian-gu sneered, In a rush? Must be nice to be so important. Lee replied warmly, Good luck today. As he walked away, Haenong Ji-yu and a few others whispered, Think he's special because his family's different? Lee overheard, clenching his fists as a cold, determined look crossed his face. One day you'll see. Elsewhere, Hyang spoke with Director In. Are you suggesting we appoint Lee Sun-ji as a full official already? Yes, Crown Prince. His abilities surpass the others. It might be early, but he's worth breaking precedent. Hyang nodded. Then let's make use of his talents. I'll expedite this. Later, the scholars gathered for assessment, and someone noted, Where's Lee Sun-ji? The director replied, Today, researcher Lee is on a separate assignment. Haenong Ji-yu, feeling smug, thought, Finally, he's gone. Now I'm the best researcher here. But his joy faded when he saw Lee seated at the director's desk. Why are you sitting there? Lee smiled. I'm officially a full researcher now. My first task is to review your calculations. This is absurd. Haenong Ji-yu protested. Taking his report, Lee said, File a complaint if you'd like, but without my approval, nothing is submitted. Seething, Haenong could only watch as Lee pointed out a mistake. You miscalculated here. That's impossible. Haenong snapped. Lee calmly replied, Let me show you the correct formula. Maybe it's time to reevaluate your skills. As Lee Sun-ji walked along, he was lost in thought. 6 months since the civil service exam, and he was already a different person, or so it felt. Kim Young-ju and Park Jae-hoon would call out, Senior Lee Sun-ji, how's the health? He'd wave them off, smirking. Stop flattering me. You too. But when Hainang Ji appeared, it was a different story. Don't you know how to greet a senior? He'd say, raising an eyebrow. Can't calculate, can't greet? Empty heads must feel pretty light. Huh. He'd leave Hainang fuming, muttering under his breath, his friend holding him back. Cool it, he'd whisper. You're picking a fight with the crown prince's favorite. Lee exhaled, pushing the past from his mind. No time for old drama. Opening the door, he silently recited his achievements like royal decrees. Rank 6 official senior researcher at the Joseon Institute for the Development of Science and Technology. Inside, the room was full, but he was too wrapped up in his thoughts to notice. If the country has its council meetings, then the institute has its special personnel operations meeting, led by the crown prince himself. And yes, I'm part of it. Just then, Hyang cleared his throat. The special meeting has a few new faces. They're a little different, he said with a smirk. But let's give them a warm welcome. The deputy director replied with a grin. Understood, Your Highness. Anyone with Lee Sun-ji's skills is worthy of a big welcome. Scanning the room, Lee noticed a few familiar and not so familiar faces. Jang Young-sil from Hanmi he recognized, but 2 members from Tukik who barely spoke Korean? Now that was a surprise. Hyang continued, Researcher Lee, stand and greet everyone. Yes, Your Highness. Lee rose, bowing. Thank you for recognizing my still developing skills. I'll work hard to meet the expectations of the Crown Prince and all of you esteemed elders. The officials nodded with approval, and Hyang grinned. Thanks to everyone, we've filled critical positions. Now we're ready for the project I've dreamed of, Joseon's own calendar. Lee blinked. A calendar? Hyang explained. We've been modifying the main calendar to fit Joseon's needs. It's time we had our own. As evening fell, the meeting pressed on. Hyang turned to his father. Remember the rescue ceremony from a few years ago? Yes, his father replied, frowning. The solar eclipse was off by 15 minutes. Hyang held up a finger. Exactly. This is what happens when the Ming calendar no longer suits us. So, after some serious math, I concluded Joseon needs its own calendar. Hyang's face darkened. The Ming calendar is a mess long, complex, and prone to errors. The deputy director and Scholar Jung lowered their heads. Apologies, Your Highness. We've fallen short. Hyang brushed it off, though inwardly he was fuming. You really should have spent more time on math. Huh? After a pause, he composed himself and declared, All right, we'll push forward at full speed with our new members. Yes, we're ready, came the rallying response. Later, Lee met with Professor Hassan and his younger brother, Jahandar. Jahandar clasped his hands, bowing. I am Amir Jahandar from Persia. I look forward to working with you. Lee introduced himself. I'm Lee Sun-ji from Anseong. As they walked, Hassan mentioned, Did you know the Ming calendar is based on Persian astronomy? That's true, Lee nodded, impressed. And the guy's Korean wasn't half bad either. Reaching a shelf filled with calendar books, Jahandar added, Here are all the texts. If anything's unclear, come find us. Lee flipped through the pages, muttering the Shoshir calendar from Goryeo and the Dadong calendar of the Ming dynasty. They both go back to the Weiwei calendar, mathematical formulas replacing old astronomy. Man, this is heaven for a numbers guy. That night, in a quiet corner of the palace, Hyang strolled slowly, thoughts swirling. Astronomy now is the way we measure time, but it's still tied to divine will. Only when we master the stars can royal authority reach the heavens. Astronomy legitimizes royal authority. An accurate calendar for all 8 provinces of Joseon is vital. As Hyang walked, he noticed a light still shining from a distant room. Someone still here at this hour? He thought, recognizing the room. Inside, Lee Sun-ji was hunched over, scribbling furiously. They used this equation? Let's see. Hearing footsteps, he turned and gasped. It was Hyang, standing there with an enigmatic smile. What's got you so focused that you didn't even hear me enter? Hyang's tone was light but curious. Lee, flustered, quickly bowed. Good evening, Your Highness. Hyang smiled. You're truly dedicated to this work, aren't you, Researcher Lee? He walked over, glancing at Lee's calculations. What's holding your attention so completely? Adjusting his cap, Lee replied, Well, Your Highness, I'm converting historical records into mathematical formulas, calculating the average error between the spring equinox and Dunwu festival. Hyang, resting his chin on his hand, watched him thoughtfully. This is beyond my training, he mused, noting the complexity of the equations. After a moment, he asked, "So, what's the biggest issue you're facing here?" Lee scratched his chin. "There are too many variables: leap years, leap months, leap days, seasonal changes. Modifications only bring temporary fixes. The Ming calendar is full of such adjustments." Hyang nodded, understanding. "So, if that's the case, modifying the current system is pointless." "Exactly," Lee agreed. "It's a cycle of endless adjustments. Honestly, it's simpler to start from scratch." "Recalculating astronomy through math?" Hyang asked. "Yes," Lee replied. "If we could formulate the movements of the sun and moon, accuracy would improve." He added, a little self-critically, "But I lack the skill to craft the perfect equations. If that's lacking, then who isn't?" Hyang thought, chuckling to himself. After a moment, he said, "What if we changed perspectives? Switched up and down, back and forth? I read something about that in a Western text." "Up and down, back and forth?" Lee echoed, intrigued. Their conversation shifted, and Hyang remarked, "Anyway, I'm starving. How about we grab something to eat?" Lee politely declined, but Hyang insisted, "Nonsense. I don't let my people go hungry. Come along." "My people," Lee thought, his heart swelling. They entered a cozy room where palace maids were just laying out food. "Your meal is served, Your Highness," they announced. Hyang smiled, gesturing toward the dishes. "Go on, eat up. The ginseng root is particularly good." At first, Lee hesitated, but one bite and he froze, overcome by the taste. "It's incredible." Hyang grinned, sipping his tea. "My father loves this dish. What do you think?" Lee, his mouth still full, nodded eagerly. "It's a whole new taste: bitter, salty, sweet like nothing I've ever had." Hyang pointed toward a side door. "That's the tea room. It's always staffed. Feel free to rest there anytime." Then, as he stood to leave, he said, "I'll be going. Head back soon too, Lee." Lee bowed deeply. "Good night, Your Highness." As he watched Hyang walk away, Lee marveled, he really takes care of us. His respect for Hyang grew. No wonder the institute runs so smoothly. Lost in thought, he pondered the cosmic mysteries. The sun, moon, stars all move, but there's something missing. He closed his eyes, frustrated. Back and forth, up and down, dizzy, rotating. Suddenly, his eyes shot open. "Wait, rotating?" Rushing to his desk, he scribbled furiously, muttering, "What if the center of this circle isn't the Earth?" As dawn broke, Lee's eyes were bloodshot, but his heart was racing. He finally put down his pen, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "This is it," he whispered. Leaping to his feet, he knocked his chair over and raised his hands to the sky. The center isn't Earth. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Palace, Hyang was at his desk, handing a document to Scholar Jung. "It'd be better this way. Submit it to the Ministry of War like this," he instructed, then added, "I haven't seen anything from the Ministry of Law for a week." Scholar Jung nodded, then added with concern, "Your Highness, there's a strange rumor about researcher Lee Sun-ji. They say he's lost his mind and hasn't worked for days." Hyang's eyes widened. "What?" In the Institute's rest area, a repetitive laugh echoed. Lee, slumped at his desk, was chuckling to himself. The deputy director entered, looking alarmed. "What's going on?" Professor Hassan explained, "It's a rumor, nothing more. He's still working hard." The deputy director sighed. "If His Highness hears this, he'll be upset." A few days later, he entered the room and found Lee asleep at his desk. "Researcher Lee," he called, shaking him gently. "Staying up all night again?" Lee didn't respond, slumped and motionless. The director's face drained of color. "Don't tell me." But Lee, still half asleep, mumbled, "I know, Your Highness." Relieved, the director sighed. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." He looked over Lee's drawings, eyebrows rising in disbelief. What on earth has he been working on? Just then, Professor Hassan arrived and glanced at the sketches. His jaw dropped. "Is this? Oh, what is this?" The deputy director marveled at the paper before him. "This is truly incredible." Jahander leaned over, nodding with admiration. "This approach is remarkable." Then, someone tapped the deputy director's shoulder. "What are you looking at so intently?" He replied without turning, "This formula is revolutionary." The person persisted, "Yes, but what is it, exactly?" Agitated, he waved them off. "This formula could change everything. Stop distracting me." He turned back, only to find himself face to face with Hyang, looking rather impatient. Startled, he quickly bowed. "Forgive me, Your Highness." Hyang waved it off, still waking up. "It's fine." "So, what's got you so captivated?" "Researcher Lee Sun-ji's formulas, Your Highness," he replied, handing the pages to Hyang. As he scanned them, Hyang's sleepy gaze sharpened, recognizing certain calculations, parallax measurements, and Venus as a reference. He might not know it, but this could support heliocentrism. Hyang's face lit with excitement. He knew precise observations would improve the math, but the concept alone was groundbreaking. Looking at Lee Sun-ji, who was still fast asleep, he thought, "This is it. This is what I've been searching for." "Take him to the resting room," he instructed the deputy director. "And bring a doctor. He'll need rest." The deputy director bowed. "Understood, Your Highness. Also, don't tell the king about this until he's finished." The staff chorused, "Yes, Your Highness." One assistant looked up, murmuring, "So, the earth, not the sky, moves." They stared at their feet, pondering. "If that's true, how do we even stay upright?" The deputy director, deep in thought, felt a flicker of doubt. Could everything we know be wrong? Just then, Hyang noticed his troubled look. "Take a walk with me. When the mind's tangled, walking clears it." As they strolled, Hyang recalled, "Remember our debate over revising the calendar?" The director nodded. "Yes, at the time, Your Highness's ideas seemed absurd." Hyang gestured to a design on a table. "This is a modified Han Tianyi. I'll assign it to researcher Jang Young-sil." The director frowned. "But the sun, not Earth, should be at the center." Hyang, caught off guard, thought, explaining heliocentrism here? "I barely remember the details." Professor Hassan spoke up. "In my homeland, there were similar theories. Many were killed for believing them. I thank heaven Joseon lacks such persecution." He added, "Frankly, I believe the earth moves too." Hyang smiled, though inwardly he thought, "Thanks, Hassan, but that's not much help." Turning to the director, he said, "This theory originates from Copernicus in the West." The director raised a brow. "So the West sages were right, and China's were wrong? I'll need better proof." Pouting slightly, Hyang said, "Fine, we'll suspend the Han Tianyi project for now." Returning to the present, the director remarked, "Even as a rational scholar, it's hard to question the sages." Hyang replied, "Whether it's the sun or earth that moves, dawn still arrives. Nature's order doesn't change. Tell me, do principles like loyalty and filial piety change? The teachings of the sages don't waver. Our duty is to honor those teachings and protect the people." With a new sense of clarity, the director nodded. "Yes, Your Highness." 1 month later, Lee Sun-ji walked wearily through the institute, holding something round in his trembling hands. Spotting him, Hyang stopped him. "Hold on. Did you buy that from the Wen family?" Startled, Lee quickly replied, "Yes, Your Highness." Hyang turned to a eunuch. "Fetch a tray with the Ongong Niahuang pill." When the tray arrived, Lee's eyes lit up. "This," Hyang encouraged, "a genuine Ongong Niahuang, made by our physician. Take it to boost your health." Lee eagerly consumed the pill, savoring it. "Thank you, Your Highness." Curious, he asked, "But what does waiting mean?" Hyang hesitated, then said, "It's Wodendi focusing strength in your lower abdomen." He grinned. "I just made it up." Lee pointed to his stomach, marveling. "It really does feel like it's gathering strength there." With a slight smile, Hyang took his leave. "Well, keep up the Wodendi effort." Later, in the Hall of State Affairs, Hyang addressed the assembly. "Today we conclude the regular council. We also have a special report." The room hushed as he continued. "Only heads of the ministries and boards may remain." As other officials left, the chief counselor whispered, "Do you know what this is about?" "No, but it seems to concern the Crown Prince." Hyang announced, "This is a special report from the Research Institute." The doors opened, and Lee Sun-ji entered, bowing deeply. "I, researcher Lee Sun-ji, greet Your Majesty and Your Highness." The king's expression softened. "I've heard much about you, particularly your skill with calculations. I invite you to explain our new calendar to the civil and military officials. A murmur spread through the hall. A new calendar? Standing before the assembly, Lee held a sheet of paper, visibly nervous. I, Lee Sun-ji, will begin explaining the new calendar developed by the Research Institute. Watching him, Hyang felt a rush of nervous excitement. Can he convince these scholars? Thanks for watching, guys. Comment Flamingo and subscribe for the next part.